We invite you to watch the video on the Aquaculture Farm channel.
Trawling is a method of fishing that involves pulling a fishing net through the water behind one or more boats. Trawling can be divided into bottom trawling and midwater trawling, depending on how high the trawl net is in the water column. The current fishing model is essentially exploitative, due to low export value added and low domestic consumption. Work is shifted to importing countries, while promoting unregistered work in response to the economic and financial constraints posed by onshore processing industries. In the 70s, employment was concentrated in industrial plants. In the South Atlantic and fishing on the high seas is illegal. A statement that regrettably ignores that the Malvinas and its waters lie within the Argentine Sea in the South Atlantic, where every year the British, through illegal licenses, exploit 250,000 tons of fish stocks of Argentina is worth about $1 billion. Not considering this fishing illegal was also a disregard for the Constitution and national law. As a result, there was no strategy in this administration on this issue, nor any sanctions imposed on foreign fishing vessels without Argentina's permission or control in the Malvinas area and where states fly their flags. A new study published Thursday found that annual carbon emissions from seabed trawling, a popular fishing method used to catch seafood on the ocean floor, are equivalent to about 40 million % of annual shipping emissions in the U.S. Mesh bottom. fishing method used to catch large quantities of fish at once, which involves dragging a net pulled by a boat along the ocean floor to catch fish and other marine animals. As the nets scrape the ocean floor, they disturb and cut up coal embedded in marine sediments, releasing carbon dioxide into the water and eventually finding its way into the atmosphere. Thursday's study published in Frontiers in Marine Science found that about 55% to 60% of the carbon dioxide produced underwater by bottom trawling would be released into the atmosphere over the next 9 years. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, about 370 million tons of carbon emissions were released into the atmosphere annually between 1996 and 2020 from bottom trawling, equivalent to about 40% of total emissions delivered. U.S. transportation by 2022. Annual bottom trawl emissions are more than double the annual fuel emissions from the global fishing fleet, 179 million tons a year, nearly double the annual emissions produced by volcanoes, 200 million tons per year, million tons, and 55% of total annual U.S. agricultural emissions, 671.5 million tons. Controversy over this practice has led to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration banning it in some areas of the seabed off the United States west coast, New Zealand restricting it to about 20% of its territorial waters. Themselves and the UK ban it in at least one body of water.
Some researchers do not believe that bottom trawling emits as much carbon as previously reported. Researchers who wrote a response to the 2021 study believe that the study overestimated the carbon emissions of bottom trawling by a factor of 100 to 1000 due to incorrect assumptions by the researchers' mistakes about the carbon cycle. From the era of settlement of Iceland in the late 9th century, until the 20th century, Iceland's economy rested on farming and fisheries. The fishing season was defined by movement of the fish and the limitations of fishing from open rowing boats. The main species spawn off the south coast in early spring and then move up along the west coast. The main fisheries took place from late January until early May, and so the southern and western parts of Iceland became the predominant fishing regions. By 1300 fisheries had become more prominent than agriculture in terms of foreign exchange earnings, initially with stockfish and fish oil being the main product. While the operations of motorized boats and trawlers were initially a success, international market conditions for fishery products after the First World War became unfavorable and products piled up. Icelanders were relative novices to marketing and their fish exports were somewhat chaotic. The advent of sail-powered vessels in Iceland in the early 1800s brought about major changes in the Icelandic fisheries with increased export of commodities. Cod was caught with hand lines and the bulk of the catch was salted. The salt had to be imported and the salting process was labor-intensive. A shark fishery also became highly profitable in the 1830s due to a rising demand in Europe for shark liver oil to fuel street lighting lamps. As a result of this development, communities started to grow considerably around the best harbors such as Reykjavik and Ísafjörður in the West Fjords. The introduction of motorized vessels at the beginning of the 20th century revolutionized Icelandic fisheries. As the fishing capacity grew, so did the total catch. In only 2 decades, Iceland acquired a modern fishing fleet, technically second to none in Northern Europe. A mere decade after the first motorized vessel went fishing in 1902, there were roughly 400 small, 12 GT or less, motorized vessels. Yet, in 1912, only 8 vessels had surpassed the size of 12 GT, but in 1930 this number had reached 224. The number of smaller vessels had more than doubled and stood at 787. Following the First World War, Icelanders also acquired a number of steam-powered fishing vessels, the so-called longliners. These were mostly second-hand North Sea trawlers used for longline fisheries during the winter and for herring fisheries in summer, while also being used as transportation vessels. The overall catch for demersal species amounted to 62,500 tons in 1905, 80,400 tons in 1920 and 216,700 tons in 1930. The Great Depression hit fisheries in Iceland hard, and in 1939, the total catch was only 113,800 tons. In 1925 the local currency had to be sharply devalued, domestic debt rose sharply and the number of bankruptcies hit an all-time high. With the Great Depression, prices for seafood plummeted and sales dried up. Trade barriers were widely introduced as well as bilateral agreements based on equal trade. In 1932, the national debt of Iceland amounted to almost 82% of asset value in the fishing industry. That situation persisted until the Second World War, when business conditions improved dramatically.
Alright.